Death for the Lord of Death, and blood for the Lord of Blood.
Hello, Planeswalkers. This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic, bringing you another deck tech video. Today, I'm very excited to be talking about Rakdos, the Showstopper. But before I do, I'd just like to take a moment to remind you to please hit that like button or maybe even that subscribe button. It helps out a lot. So, Rakdos, the Showstopper, is a 6/6 flying trample legendary demon for 4 generic, a black, and a red. And Rakdos says, whenever Rakdos the Showstopper enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp. Destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. So, what I have to say is that so far, Rakdos is my favorite card spoiled from the up-and-coming Ravnica Allegiance set. For one, I have always loved the character Rakdos, his abilities, and how he synergizes with demons. So it's just super cool to see another Rakdos print. Secondly, he's got great stats. 6/6 flying trample for 6 mana is a great payoff. Third, he has the potential at being a one-sided board wipe. Fourth, and most importantly, he's a tribal commander for demons, imps, and devils. Yes, devils. This just happens to be a creature type I've always believed deserved more attention, and I'm stoked to see that attention is coming on the ability of one of my favorite characters. Devils are really cool creatures, and some of them are really powerful, but they don't seem to have always, had an easy time finding a home, finding synergy. So Rakdos gives devils a home. Imps, on the other hand, have a lot left to be desired. I did find room for one imp in the deck, but it was not Stinkweed Imp, the most recognizable imp in the game. If you somehow wanted to incorporate more graveyard synergy into the deck, then sure, go ahead and get yourself a Stinkweed Imp. That'd be a fine choice. I mostly stuck with Devil and Demon aggro, kind of. So this deck includes many forms of removal and excels at destroying the opponent's creatures while filling the board with demons and devils, pretty much. So it is also slightly built around Rakdos's destroy effect, specifically, on top of including cards to beat down the opponent's face. I've also included 2 win conditions. So let's start with the devils. Vexing Devil is one you normally see in 1-versus-1 games, so it's really exciting to see it have sort of a place in Commander now. So Vexing Devil is a 4/3 devil for 1 red mana, and when it enters the battlefield, any opponent may have it deal 4 damage to him or her. If a player does, you sacrifice Vexing Devil. But if not, you have a 4/3 for just 1. Pretty sweet. Especially if you're playing, that Plains Raider format or something. Next, we have Sin Prodder, 2 generic and a red for a 3/2 Menace Devil. That says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Any opponent may have you put that card into your graveyard. If a player does, Sin Prodder deals damage to that player equal to that card's converted mana cost. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. So, yeah, 3/2 Menace isn't bad, and, it just draws you cards. I find in other decks, I usually ended up taking it out because, it dies to removal really easily. But now it has a little bit more synergy with the deck, thankfully, so, yeah, another good place for Sin Prodder. Next we have Hellrider, 2 generic and 2 red for a 3/3 Haste Devil. Whenever a creature you control attacks, Hellrider deals 1 damage to the defending player. That can equal a lot of damage over time. Super cool. Our next devil is Charmbreaker Devils, 5 generic and a red for a 4/4 devil. At the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Charmbreaker Devils gets +4/+0 until the end of the turn. So this has seen a home already in a lot of, instant and sorcery based decks, but not too many though. So I really like it here. We do have, quite a few really cool instants and sorceries. Next we have Flare of the Hatebound, 5 generic and a red for a 4/2 devil with Undying. When this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. When Flare of the Hatebound or another creature enters the battlefield from your graveyard, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So even if a creature from your graveyard entered the battlefield under someone else's control, this effect would still happen. But there aren't too many graveyard synergies in the deck, but there are a couple, and thankfully Flare of the Hatebound is able to come back all by himself, so he pays off all by himself. Next we have Bedlam Reveler, 6 generic and 2 reds, so that's 8 mana for a 3/4 Devil Horror, but Bedlam Reveler costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So potentially you could get this for 2 mana. It also has Prowess, so whenever you cast any non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. And when Bedlam Reveler enters the battlefield, discard your hand, and then you draw 3 cards. So we have a couple of devils that draw us cards, and then many devils that deal damage, and then we got Charmbreaker Devils, which gets us instants and sorceries back. Pretty sweet. Now on to the demons. So, Demon of Catastrophes is our cheapest demon for 4 mana. It's 2 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 flying trample demon. As an additional cost, you have to sacrifice a creature. Next we have Rakdos, also a 4-drop actually. 2 black and 2 red for a 6/6 demon, but you can't cast Rakdos unless an opponent has lost life this turn. And Rakdos has flying and trample, and creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So let's say you swing in with Rakdos for 6 damage. All of your creature spells for the whole rest of the turn all cost 6 generic mana less to cast. That is super huge. The old school Rakdos right here. He just makes everything way cheaper to cast, which is really important in a demon deck. A deck where generally everything else other than Rakdos is going to cost tons of mana. So next we have Indulgent Tormentor, 3 generic and 2 black for a 5/3 flying demon. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card unless target opponent sacrifices a creature or pays 3 life. So you get to choose which opponent makes the choice. But often, they're going to make a choice that doesn't involve you drawing a card. So I found when you play Indulgent Tormentor, you really want to politic it, they're always going to be bummed out about having to make the choice. So make sure you at least mention to them, why don't you just let me draw a card? Say that to them. Say, well, you could at least, just let me draw a card at least once, because I find so often they're always going to be trying to pay the life or sack a creature, and they're going to be bummed about it, and just remind them, you can just let me draw a card. I mean, that is a choice. All right, next we have Demon of Wailing Agonies, 3 generic and 2 black for 4/4 flying demon with Lieutenant. So as long as you control your commander, as long as you control Rakdos the Showstopper, Demon of Wailing Agonies gets +2/+2 and has whenever Demon of Wailing Agonies deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices a creature. So a little bit more removal here. Next we have Archfiend of Depravity, 3 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 flying demon. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, that player chooses up to 2 creatures he or she controls, then sacrifices the rest. Yeah, more removal. Next we have one of my favorite demons ever printed, Master of Cruelties, 3 generic and a black and a red for a 1/4 first strike death touch. So that's really powerful. Basically what that means is it's going to kill anything that it either blocks or is blocking it, because it's going to deal combat damage to that creature before that creature deals any combat damage to it. And because it's dealing death touch, no matter how much damage it's dealing, it's always going to be enough to kill the creature that it's blocking or that's blocking it. So Master of Cruelties, it's just really cool to see both first strike and death touch on a creature. Also, Master of Cruelties can only attack alone, which there are ways to get around that, for example with Kali of the Vast or something. And whenever Master of Cruelties attacks a player and isn't blocked, that player's life total becomes 1. Master of Cruelties assigns no combat damage this combat. So if Master of Cruelties isn't blocked, he deals no combat damage, and the defending player, just their life total becomes 1, and that's before any other damage is dealt even, and so there's lots of combos with Master of Cruelties where, because he has First Strike, he would deal First Strike damage that is prevented, the opponent's life total becomes 1, and then somehow you deal 1 more damage with another attacking creature like Kali of the Vast, who cheated Master of Cruelties in or something like that. You can look up more Master of Cruelties combos, but he works really well in this deck too, just being a really powerful creature all on his own. So let's continue. Next we got Bloodgift Demon, 3 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 flying demon. At the beginning of your upkeep, target player draws a card and loses 1 life. Probably you. And yeah, he's drinking. Pretty sweet. Next, we got more demons. Sire of Insanity is a 6/4 demon for 4 generic, a black, and a red. And he says at the beginning of each player's end step, each player discards his or her hand. So this is going to make every single player discard their whole hand, which sounds really bad, but as long as you have the better board state, it pretty much means you win the game. Is how Sire of Insanity works. And, having just a 6/4 demon out is often, in 1v1 especially, is often enough to have a better board state. But, especially in a deck like this where we can get a ton of demons out, if you think of any deck where you can, cheat out creatures somehow, Sire of Insanity is awesome. It can just definitely win you the game. Everyone just suddenly has no more options. They're just discarding their whole hand. Super cool. Yeah, as long as you have the better board state, this means you're going to keep that better board state. Alright, next we have Rakdos the Defiler, a 7/6 legendary demon for 2 generic, 2 black, and 2 red, so 6 mana total. And he has flying and trample, just like all the other Rakdoses. And whenever Rakdos the Defiler attacks, sacrifice half the non-demon permanents you control rounded up. Whenever Rakdos deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices half the non-demon permanents he or she controls rounded up. So you can see, obviously, we have tons of demons here, so we're not going to be sacrificing as much as the opponents. But, you got to plan it out, obviously, with Rakdos the Defiler. Often he's going to sit there and just be a blocker. But, if you got tons of demons out, it's great. It's fabulous. It's a one-sided board wipe. Next we have Demon Lord Belzenlock, 4 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 Elder Demon with flying and trample. And when Demon Lord Belzenlock enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card, then put that card into your hand. If the card's converted mana cost is 4 or greater, repeat this process. Demon Lord Belzenlock deals 1 damage to you for each card put into your hand this way. So, especially in a deck like this with tons of, high cast demons, you have the potential of drawing, I'd say, at least like 5 cards with Demon Lord Belzenlock. But more often than not, he's just going to draw you 1 or 2, and that's fine as well. But you could get up to 5, maybe even 6 cards. That's crazy. You are going to lose that life, but in a format where we start with 40 life, that doesn't matter so much. Next we have Obnixilis Unshackled. 4 generic and 2 black for a 4/4 flying trample demon. You notice how many of these demons have trample. It's pretty awesome. And whenever an opponent searches his or her library, that player sacrifices a creature and loses 10 life. Yeah, even if they crack Evolving Wilds. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Obnixilis Unshackled. Yeah, so when they sacrifice that creature, Obnixilis just gets bigger and bigger. Speaking of creatures dying, we have Harvester of Souls, 4 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 Death Touch Demon. And whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. Sweet. Yeah. You see the theme here, going with the demons. We like things to die. They all create things to die, and then hopefully we draw lots of cards with Harvester of Souls. We get huge Obnixilis, Rakdos himself, he doesn't force things to die, but, there's a 50-50 chance that things are going to die. It's interesting how Rakdos is worded, actually, how it doesn't say, you choose you flip a coin, and if you win the coin flip, it just says if it comes up tails. I think it's funny. I do think that gets around some confusion, I guess, and it also gives people more incentive to go out and make their own Rakdos coins or something. That sounds like a lot of fun. All right. Anyway, continuing, we have Kothafed. I don't know how you pronounce it. Kothafed Soul Harvester. 4 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 demon with flying. And whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Yeah, sweet. Drawing cards is great. Losing 1 life is not a bad deal. Next we have Overseer of the Damned. 5 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 demon with flying. And when Overseer of the Damned enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature, any creature. And whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Sweet. Next we have Rune Scarred Demon. 6/6 flying demon for 7 mana total, 5 generic and 2 black. When Rune Scarred Demon enters the battlefields, you may search your library for any card, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Yeah, sweet. Tutoring. Next we have Abhorrent Overlord. 5 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 flying demon. When Alright, let's try this again. When Abhorrent Overlord enters the battlefield, put a number of 1/1 black harpy creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield equal to your devotion to black. Each black mana symbol in the mana costs of permanents you control count towards your devotion to black. And at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Wow, so much text on this guy. Excuse me. Alright, continuing. We have Elbrus, the Binding Blade. 7 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you unattach Elbrus, the Binding Blade, and then transform it. And it has Equip 1. So when you transform it, it becomes Withengar Unbound, this 13/13 legendary demon here. So I think it's super cool to have this ability. You got a demon trapped inside of a sword. It's just awesome. When that deals damage to a player, it flips into the 13/13 demon. So Withengar Unbound is a legendary demon. Unfortunately, it can't be your commander. Anyway, so Withengar Unbound is flying. It has Intimidate and Trample. So Intimidate means it can't be blocked except for by artifact creatures or by creatures that share a color with it, which means, black creatures in this case. And whenever a player loses the game, you put 13 +1/+1 counters on Withengar Unbound. So yeah, this guy could be a 26/26. And beyond that, he could be a 39/39, I guess. Yeah, awesome. Next we have Archfiend of Despair. 6 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 flying demon. Your opponents can't gain life, and at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life that player lost this turn. It's one of my favorite cards that came out of the Battle Bond set because it, combines cards. It says your opponents can't gain life, and them losing life is like a Wound Reflection. A really cool enchantment, Wound Reflection, so I always liked that combination of effects there. Alright. Next we have Lord of the Void. 4 generic and 3 black for a 7/7 flying demon. Whenever Lord of the Void deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 7 cards of that player's library, then put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield under your control. Yeah, he's really sweet. Just stealing your opponent's creatures is awesome. It's pretty rare that he whiffs, but every once in a while, you're going to hit 7 lands, but most of the time, you're going to hit a creature with this guy. Next, we have Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded, 5 generic and 3 black for an 8/8 flying trample demon. And you can pay 2 life and sacrifice another creature and search your library for any card and put that card into your hand and then shuffle your library. So a great sacrifice outlet, a great tutor, a great humongous scary demon. Perfect for Rakdos. Next we have Dread Cacodemon, 7 generic and 3 black for an 8/8 demon. It doesn't have flying or anything, but what it does do is when Dread Cacodemon enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, destroy all all other creatures your opponents control, then tap all other creatures you control. So the way you do this is you cast this on your second main phase after you've attacked, so you don't care that you're tapping all of your creatures, and that's not that big of a deal anyway, considering you're destroying all of your opponent's creatures. So really awesome card, Dread Cacodemon. All right, next we have Westvale Abbey. So Westvale Abbey is a land that turns into a demon. So we're getting into one of our lands a little early here, because the demon it turns into is Ormendal Profane Prince. So Westvale Abbey is a land that adds a colorless mana to your mana pool, where you can pay 5 and tap it and pay 1 life to put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield, or you can pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice 5 creatures, such as 5 of those 1/1 white clerics, and you transform Westvale Abbey into the 9/7 flying legendary demon, which also can't be your commander, and it has flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. Yeah, pretty awesome. And that is it for the creatures. That is all the creatures. So now let's... Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. There are the Imps, or the non-demons, non-devils. So we got 3 more creatures here. Steel Hellkite, Anger, and Cadaver Imp. So let's talk about them real quick. Steel Hellkite is really important for any Rakdos deck, because Rakdos colors have an impossible time of dealing with enchantments, outside of, I guess, Chaos Warp. But what we need in this deck are ways to permanently remove enchantments, because, Rakdos just has no way to do that. It's the unfortunate thing is we're so good at removal, right? We're so good at killing creatures, but we need to keep a lot of our removal spots open for enchantment removal, so we'll get things like Steel Hellkite. So we got a 5/5 Flying Dragon for 6 mana, and you can pay 2 mana to give it +1/+0 to the end of the turn, or you can pay X and destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. So you can use this to kill actually a bunch of your opponent's permanents. You can pay 0 mana to kill all of their tokens, or, you can, selectively just pick off whatever you need there. So pretty sweet card. Next we have Anger, 3 generic and a red for a 2/2 incarnation with haste. And as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So this is a way to give your creatures haste from the graveyard. Pretty hard for your opponents to deal with, and having all of those demons have haste is just game winning for sure. Haste is like having an extra combat step. All right, next we have our 1 Imp in the game. I found room for 1 Imp because, it's a little graveyard recursion. People are going to be targeting us. They're probably going to be killing our demons, killing our Steel Hellkite maybe. And so the Cadaver Imp is 1 generic and 2 black for a 1/1 Flying Imp. And when Cadaver Imp enters the battlefield, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, little graveyard recursion there on a stick. And it works with Rakdos' ability, but really, other than this and Stinkweed Imp, I can't think of any Imps that are really worth putting in the deck. Alright, so now there are no more creatures. On to some things that synergize with Rakdos himself. So, no, my screen's not changing. There we go. Okay, so we have Conjurer's Closet. 5 generic for an artifact. It says, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So you exile Rakdos and return him to the battlefield, and then his enter the battlefield effect happens again, because you need him to be, what we call blinking, right, or flickering in and out of the battlefield to, have more of a chance that the creatures are going to die, because it's not guaranteed the opponent's creatures are going to die. It's a 50-50 chance. So, and especially if they're running demons or devils, then then those creatures aren't going to die at all. But anyway, yeah, Conjurer's Closet is going to make it so Rakdos' ability triggers every single one of your turns. Pretty awesome. Next, we have Whip of Erebos, 2 generic and 2 black for a legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures you control have lifelink, so this is our way to gain a little bit of life in the deck. We can also pay 2 generic and 2 black and tap it to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Next we have Rise of the Dark Realms, 7 generic and 2 black for a sorcery. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. So all those creatures we've been destroying the whole game with Rakdos and the other demons, we get them all back onto the battlefield under our control. Rise of the Dark Realms is definitely the most powerful reanimation spell in the game, hence that's why it's 9 mana. Next we have Lightning Greaves, 2 generic for an equipment that has equip 0. Equipped creature has haste and shroud, so maybe we can get in that commander damage with Rakdos. Next we have a couple of tutors. Demonic Tutor, 1 generic and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Next we have Increasing Ambition, 4 generic and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand. If Increasing Ambition was cast from your graveyard, instead search your library for 2 cards and put those cards into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then it has flashback for 8, so you can pay 8 mana and cast it from your graveyard. And as it said, when you cast it from your graveyard, you get to search for 2 cards instead of 1. So Increasing Ambition can get you a total of 3 cards to your hand. It's a lot of mana, but in the end, tutoring for 3 cards is pretty awesome. And we're playing a format that's pretty late game oriented, so getting that mana isn't so impossible. Next, we have Blade of Selves, 2 generic for an equipment that has equip 4. An equipped creature has Myriad, so whenever it attacks for each opponent other than the defending player, you may create a token that's a copy of that creature that's tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. Exile the tokens at the end of the combat. So if you think about this with Rakdos, it's not going to deal tons of combat damage because you are going to have to sacrifice those tokens because Rakdos is legendary. But each one of those tokens entering the battlefield is going to have the enter the battlefield effect that Rakdos has. So it's going to force all of your opponents to have the coin flip happen again, and it pretty much guarantees that all of your opponent's creatures are going to die. Because if you have 3 opponents in the game of Commander, you're attacking 1 opponent. That means you're going to be creating 2 copies of Rakdos that are in the battlefield. That means for everything that's not a demon, devil, or imp, you're going to be flipping the coin twice. And if it's a tails, either time, you're destroying that creature. All right, moving along. Moving right along. We have the ramp. So, our spells are very expensive, so we have a ton of ramp. A total of 12 extra ramp spells going on here. Starting with Soul Ring. Yay. Next we have Rakdos Signet, 2 generic for an artifact. You pay 1 and tap it to add a black and a red to your mana pool. Make sure new players understand how this works because they often, just tap this to add 2 mana to their mana pool. They don't realize they have to pay 1 in order to activate it to add a black and a red. And they say, why do you do that? Well, you do that to fix your mana to make sure you have the correct color mana to cast spells. Next we have Jet Medallion, 2 generic for an artifact. It says, black spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Every single spell that's black. And this can add up to a ton of extra mana each turn. Same with Ruby Medallion, 2 generic for an artifact that says red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And we have both of our monuments. So Bantu's Monument is a legendary artifact. Black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So if you team this up with Jet Medallion, then the black creature spells are going to cost 2 less to cast. And whenever you cast any creature spell, even if it's not black, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Next is Hazoret's Monument, 3 generic for a legendary artifact. Red creature spells cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast any creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Yeah, sweet. Next is Rakdos Locket. It is not released yet because it's in the Ravnica Allegiance, but we have got the spoiler for it, so we do have all the lockets. So Rakdos Locket taps to add a black or a red for 3 generic, and then you can pay 4 hybrid red-black mana and tap it and sacrifice Rakdos Locket to draw 2 cards. Next we have Rakdos Keyrune, 3 generic for an artifact that taps to add black or red to your mana pool, or you can pay black and red, and Rakdos Keyrune becomes a 3/1 black and red devil artifact creature token with first strike until the end of the turn. So we got another devil here. Sweet. Next is Thran Dynamo, 4 generic for an artifact that taps to add 3 mana to our mana pool. Excellent. Next we have a couple of enchantments. Black Market is 3 generic and 2 black for an enchantment that says whenever a creature dies, you put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black mana to your mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. So I have seen Black Market get huge. I have seen this have so many counters on it, and at the beginning of my turn, I've been able to add 10, 15 mana. You know, if you can get this out early, over the course of the game, tons of creatures are going to die, and you're going to get tons of mana out of Black Market. Excuse me. Alright, so next is Revel in Riches, 4 generic and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap it and sacrifice this artifact to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. Yeah, so if somebody board wipes and you have this on the battlefield, you can very easily win the game. Or if you cast Brass's Bounty and you have this on the battlefield, you can very easily win the game. 6 generic and a red. It's a sorcery. For each land you control, create a colorless treasure artifact token that you can tap and sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this is one of our win conditions here. Revel in Riches, hopefully teamed up with Brass's Bounty, is pretty much going to win us the game. Alright. Next we have some draw card spells. Phyrexian Arena is 1 generic and 2 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Which, you know, we start the game with 40 life, so we don't really mind if we have to pay 39 life to draw 39 cards. Hopefully we're going to gain some life back before we die. Next we have Necropotence, 3 black mana for an enchantment that says skip your draw step. Oh, that's bad. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. Oh, that's bad too. But wait, there's more. You can pay 1 life and exile the top card of your library face down. Put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. And you can do that as many times as you want. So you could pay 10 life to draw 10 cards. 20 life to draw 20 cards. Yeah. So, unfortunately, you do still have to discard, and anything you discard will go into exile. So you really want to make sure you got Reliquary Tower, which I am just now realizing I need to put into the deck. So make sure any deck that has Necropotence, you got to put Reliquary Tower. And I'm remembering right now, yeah, got to put Reliquary Tower. I did forget to put Reliquary Tower in the lands, but remembering it now, before we even get to the lands, Reliquary Tower, very important for every deck, especially ones with Necropotence. And next we have Liliana's Contract, 3 generic and 2 black for an enchantment that says when Liliana's Contract enters the battlefield, you draw 4 cards and you lose 4 life. So yeah, draw 4 cards, pretty awesome. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more demons with different names, you win the game. So this is our other win condition here. Alright, next we have some more removal, and like I said, we need lots of ways to remove enchantments, so we start with 3 colorless forms of removal. Boom Pile is 4 generic mana for an artifact that says tap it and flip a coin. If you win the flip, destroy all non-land permanents. So this is actually a really excellent card. I mean, paying only 4 mana to be able to destroy all non-land permanents is great for any deck. But especially in a deck that needs help destroying enchantments and things like that. So Rakdos decks really need Boom Pile. Even though it's a 50-50 chance you are eventually going to get it, hopefully no one's going to be able to blow it up. But, I mean, to do it for 4 mana is definitely worth it. Next we have Argentum Armor, 6 generic for an equipment that has 6 to equip. Equipped creature gets +6/+6, and whenever equipped creature attacks, destroy target permanent. Yeah, sweet. All this 6/6/6 stuff is pretty great with Rakdos too. Next we have Spine of Ishsa, 7 generic for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target permanent. When it is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you return it to its owner's hand. And you get to hopefully do it again and again. Pretty awesome. Next we have Burn Away, 4 generic and a red. For an instant, Burn Away deals 6 damage to target creature. When that creature dies this turn, exile all cards from its controller's graveyard. So this is really great for dealing with the Locust God or the Scorpion God or the Scarab God, because it's going to exile them before their end step when those cards would go back to their hand. Next we have Bedevil, 2 black and a red. For an instant, you destroy any artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Man, I love this card. Super great commander card. It's going to be a great commander staple. Next is Comet Storm, which is half removal, half a game-winning card. So it's X red, and it has multi-kicker 1, so you may pay an additional 1 any number of times as you cast the spell. Choose target creature or player, then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. So if you have 3 opponents, then you'll have to kick this an extra 2 times. You'll have to pay an extra 2 for the multi-kicker to target all 3 opponents, and then hopefully pay enough into X after that to deal all that damage and kill your opponents, which very often you can do, especially with something like, Neheb. It's a great Minotaur that adds tons of red mana to your mana pool. Unfortunately, not in this deck. Next, we have a few board wipes. So, in Garrick's Wake is a sorcery for 7 generic and 2 black, a little expensive, but you destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Excellent. Basically a perfect one-sided board wipe. Same thing with Kindred Dominance in any tribal deck. It's 5 generic and 2 black for a sorcery. Choose a creature type. Destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type. Excellent. And finally, we have Blasphemous Act, which is a board wipe that we could potentially play for just 1 mana. So it's 8 generic and 1 red for a sorcery, and this costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. And Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. So yeah, you could play Blasphemous Act for just 1 red mana if there's 13 creatures on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature, which is pretty much enough to kill any creature on the battlefield. Yeah, pretty great. Alright, next we have our lands. We have 38 lands total, but our first land doesn't add any mana to our mana pool, so really we have 37 lands and a Glacial Chasm. So because I'm assuming that the Rakdos deck is going to gain a lot of hate, I really suggest you get Glacial Chasm. It's a land that has cumulative upkeep of 2 life. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you put an age counter on this, and then you pay its upkeep cost for each age counter on it. So what that means is the turn after you play this, you're going to pay 2 life. Your turn after you play, the turn after that, your upkeep after that, you're going to have to pay 4 life. Your upkeep after that, you're going to have to pay 6 life, and so on. So when Glacial Chasm comes into play, you also have to sacrifice a land. Boo. Creatures you control can't attack. Boo. But here's the good thing. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Yeah, all damage that would be dealt to you. Your opponents can't deal any combat damage to you. They can't deal any burn damage to you. The only thing they can do is drain your life. And this sounds bad, with all the other costs, but when you think about the cumulative upkeep, that isn't going to drain you nearly of as much life as you would be taking from the damage of your opponents if all 3 of your opponents are ganging up on you. If all 3 opponents are ganging up on you, they can just take you out in 1 turn. They can easily deal you 50 damage in one turn. So yeah, paying 4 life, 6 life, 8 life a turn, to make sure that doesn't happen is totally worth it. Glacial Chasm, I put it in any deck that I think is going to get hated on. And it works. It works every time. It saves me. Next, we have several lands that I know you're going to scoff at, but you got to hear me out. We need the ramp in this deck. We need the ramp lands, so we have all of the lands that are going to add 2 mana to our mana pool instead of 1. So we have the Dormant Volcano, which enters tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice it unless you return an untapped mountain you control to its owner's hand. Yeah, all pretty bad, but it taps to add both a colorless and a red mana to your mana pool. And then on your next turn, you get to play that mountain that you returned to your hand anyway again. So it's not like you're really losing mana. You're just losing the mana for one turn. For one turn, you're basically just sacrificing all your mana, But in the end, you are coming out a land ahead. And when you think about it, even in green, you have to pay 2 mana to search your library for a land and put it on the battlefield, like Explosive Vegetation or something like that, right? And so this is like kind of doing the same thing. You're tapping the land that enters the battlefield. You're returning another land to your hand to get 1 extra mana in the end. So it really is worth it, especially in a long game format. We're playing a format where the long game is important, so things like this become more important. So Everglades is the same thing. It enters tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless you return an untapped swamp you control to its owner's hand, and it taps to add a colorless and a black to your mana pool. Next, we have Temple of the False God, which taps to add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands, which, again, in a late game format, you are almost guaranteed to get 5 lands eventually. I mean, I've never regretted having Temple of the False God in my deck. Next, we have Rakdos Carnarium. It enters tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps to add a black and a red mana to your mana pool. Yeah, another land that adds 2 mana to your mana pool. You have to return a land you control to its owner's hand, so make sure it's a land that you've already tapped for mana and that enters the battlefield again untapped. Unless it's a special land that does things when it enters the battlefield, maybe, Also make sure that when you play this card, you're not going to end up with 8 cards in your hand at the end of the turn. Next, we have Phyrexian Tower, which taps to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it and sacrifice a creature and add 2 black mana to your mana pool. So a nifty little sacrifice outlet that helps us add extra mana to our mana pool. Next, we have High Market, which taps to add a colorless mana to our mana pool, or we can tap it and sacrifice a creature and gain 1 life. Again, another sacrifice outlet, which is really important, if an opponent's going to try to exile one of our creatures, try to gain control of one of our creatures, try to enchant one of our creatures, we can choose to sacrifice it instead and prevent those things from happening. Alright, so next we have Homeward Path, which taps to add a colorless mana to our mana pool, or we can tap it and each player gains control of all creatures he or she controls. Next we have Ghost Quarter, which taps for a colorless, or we can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. So this is our way of getting rid of problematic lands. There are certain lands out there that are going to prevent our creatures from dealing damage. There are lands out there that are going to tap to add tons of mana. There are all kinds of lands out there that we might want to destroy with Ghost Quarter. Next we have Bajuka Bog, which goes in every single black deck I've ever owned. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Sweet. And it taps to add a black mana to our mana pool. Next we have Reliquary Tower. Oh wait, I forgot to put that in the deck. Whoops, get one for this deck. Well, I put in Command Tower. It works. It taps to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool of our commander's color identity. Next we have Shadow Blood Ridge, which is a kind of signet land. You have to pay 1 mana and tap it to add both a black and a red mana to your mana pool. So mana fixer. Next we have Bloodstained Mire. You tap it and pay 1 life and sacrifice it to search your library for any swamp or mountain card and put that card onto the battlefield. and then shuffle your library. So it doesn't have to be a basic mountain or swamp. So you could, for example, get Blood Crypt, which is a mountain swamp land, and it taps to add a black or red to your mana pool. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life. Alright, continuing with the last of the lands, we have Dragon Skull Summit. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a mountain. And it taps to add either a black or a red to your mana pool. We've already talked about West Vale Alley. West Vale Abbey taps to add a colorless, or it eventually turns into a demon. Next we have Cavern of Souls. Really important because people are going to be ganging up on us. They're going to be trying to counter our spells, so we want Cavern of Souls. Cavern of Souls, when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, choose demons. It taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. Yeah, so none of your demon spells that you cast with Cavern of Souls will be able to be countered. Great advantage. And then we have 9 mountains and 9 swamps. And that's it. That's Rakdos, the Showstopper. So, let me know what you think. Go in those comments and let me know what you would do differently. Let me know what cards you would put in the deck. And please hit that like and or that subscribe button. It helps out a lot. And that's it. So this is Eric from Bane Alley Magic signing off. Until next time, take care, take it easy.